on this week's episode of...
Bill, I really hope you didn't just ruin what should have been clean start there. But anyway, good evening.
Good evening, Sandi. This is going to be the best one ever.
Let's hope so.
Now, why is there explosions going on outside your window?
Because it's bonfire night here in the UK.
And why do they do this?
In celebration of the foiling of the gunpowder plot to blow up the king by Guy Fawkes.
Apparently the gunpowder wasn't going to go off anyway because it had been sitting in the storeroom for too long because of the plague. And they knew that. I was listening to The Rest is History with Tom Holland, which is a British history podcast yesterday, and they were talking about it.
So you asked me the question to set yourself up to sound smart.
No, I know very little about it other than the fact that I have once experienced the burning of an effigy of Guido Fawkes. And also I know the thing about the gunpowder not being any good. But beyond that, I don't know anything.
Anyway, this evening, for our particular topic, speaking of seeing the artist. Bill, how do you think an artist gets to be an artist?
Well, they go to art school and they get a piece of paper that says, "You are hereby an artist."
Okay. So as we all know that you think that's a load of baloney, could you please tell me what you really think gets an artist to be an artist?
The main distinction between an artist and a non-artist is that an artist makes art.
Who says when art is art?
Well, this is an eternal question that when you get right down to it, has very vague definitions and properties. Because if you allow other people to decide whether your things you make is art, then I don't know. I think you need to decide whether what you make is art, and damned if they like it or not,
Okay. So I've been speaking to some very clever people this week, aside from you. And the general consensus was that an artist is self-defining.
Yeah.
But that really...
Do you think that's true? Do you agree with that?
That really stirred some stuff.
Okay.
Not just in me, but in others as well. The sense that one can say, I'm an artist, and then that's the only thing that one needs to allow it. Sure. But there's so many things connected with it that would, I think, complicate the sense that somebody can simply claim to be an artist and then is one. You're saying that to make art is the thing that defines the artist who also defines themselves as an artist. But
I think at some point you actually have to do the thing.
Well, I think we both know people who call themselves artists who do very little or who do nothing.
Sure. I mean, I think in our modern world, it ends up being a handy moniker for that people a badge they can put on. We used to have a number of conversations on an old show I used to do about the definition of artists and art. And you can go round and round in circles, but ultimately, I don't know, it's either there or it's not. It's sort of the definition of pornography. You know it when you see it.
But rather unfortunate example to give there, Bill. But you might know it when you see it.
That's in reference to a Supreme Court opinion in the United States.
But my point is, you might know it when you see it, yet another person doesn't share the same perception.
And that is the problem, yeah. Go ahead. Now, Rembrandt painted himself every 6 weeks over the course of his life, seemingly.
Painted a lot of self-portraits, yes, and we do have the art. We've talked about it before on here, that we've got this most amazing trace of time through Rembrandt's work.
Do you think it's because he didn't have anything else to do or didn't have a lot of friends? What do you think it was?
I think he was just a prolific painter, and I think that when he didn't have a model around him, this is probably what he did. I don't know if it was a particular vanity. I think once Saskia, his wife, died, he maybe didn't have always access to models or the best models. But anyway, self-portrait at the age of 63 is the last portrait he made of himself. And he died later this year. He was always aware that he was an artist. He had such incredible confidence in his art.
But do you think that there are also people who have a lot of confidence in their art, and their art is, considered terrible. So confidence alone doesn't denote much, right?
I don't know about that, because the other thing I've put here, we've only got 2 images this evening, is I've got this. Now, you and I know, everybody knows, Vincent Van Gogh, considered one of the finest artists of all time, and yet in his lifetime was not.
Sure. And plenty of people who were are completely forgotten now.
He plugged away at his craft, and he was determined in his art. But he didn't have that, I guess, that luxury, that privilege of being acknowledged as an artist by an external world in his lifetime.
Yep. But we are also defining this in a very Western hierarchical kind of way, right?
Yeah.
The fact that some people in some artist group in Paris in 1886 or something like that didn't include him in some exhibition meant that he wasn't an artist of some note. Sometimes I wonder, a lot of people will point to somebody like Van Gogh and they'll say, oh, well, okay, the guy was painting all these paintings. He made all this work and he didn't care what people think. He just kept painting. And that's like that. There's a certain martyrdom involved in a definition of an artist.
Explain that a bit, please.
Just that if an artist isn't externally successful as an artist or considered successful at a certain point and maybe is later or isn't at all, people automatically assume that that person didn't care whether he was successful in his lifetime, but he was doing it anyway because he loved his art so much. And it may be that he was always looking for the externality and never got it. And it was just sort of, he died a very crestfallen person. That there is this separation that some of us put into. It is difficult unless you are somehow independently wealthy or, I don't know, the Buddha, to separate your internal definition of yourself with other people's definition of you. Do you know what I mean? I think that's universally true.
Do we, or should we look to external validation?
Okay, if you don't, the problem with not looking to external validation is that then it's all internal validation and maybe you're just a nutter, and that maybe you're just fooling yourself. Rembrandt had a fairly successsul career when he was alive, correct?
Really very successful. He was
right.
I mean, at times he was very wealthy, but at times he was not very wealthy, but because he just simply spent too much money. He amassed his own art collection of others' art in his lifetime.
But it's also, you also have to look at it in the age of, okay, yes, but he was also a man living in a time period where the area he lived in was going through a wealth growth time. You know what I'm saying? Like basically he was on a tide that was lifting all ships. He was making art.
Actually, no, I would contest that, Bill, because when Rembrandt was growing up, artists in Holland were having a dreadful time. The Netherlands, through their Reformation and their growth of Protestantism, a lot of commissions for artists would have come from the Catholic Church.
Okay, sure. Right? Yes.
So artists It's like you saying the other day when you came to meet my class, you were telling them that you decided to become a photographer just as the bottom fell out the market.
Yep.
Well, Rembrandt did the same with painting.
Yep.
And actually, he totally eschewed advice. He went against the advice of everybody who knew him. Everybody said, go to Italy. Go to Italy like all other young artists, because that's the only place you will flourish and it's the only place you will get a patron. And actually he said, no, I don't need to go to Italy. I don't need to go to Italy to learn about painting. I can learn everything I want to know simply by staying here in the Netherlands, which was very controversial.
Yes, but it was also along with the Protestantism came the rise of the middle class and people who had money to spend on paintings of their families and all that kind of crap. So, I mean, yes, it was a time of change, but I think that it also, who knows if Rembrandt was actually painting the kind of stuff he wanted to paint, or if he was painting the kind of stuff that people wanted him to paint to make a decent living. Do we know?
I think Rembrandt was pretty much on his own roll.
Yeah.
For a lot of the time. As I was saying, though, he wasn't always a wealthy man. He was a miller's son, but his father was wealthy for that social kind of level.
Sure.
And he did go to study painting. He moved to Amsterdam. He had a stint in Amsterdam. He went elsewhere. He came back. He met Saskia, his wife, who was the young cousin of his patron or his patron's friend or something, and fell wildly in love with her. They had a very sad time, I think. She kept having babies that died. Eventually, they did have one that lived, but she was very sick, and then she died. And she came from money. And in her will, she left her estate to Rembrandt and Titus, their son. But
so he wasn't for want of money.
No, but she did say that if he ever became married again, he would lose the money. He wouldn't have the money.
No, that's just mean.
The house.
That's just vindictive.
Well, Rembrandt also though lived a high life, and actually her family really didn't like him. And they were constantly accusing him of squandering her wealth.
Sure. Happens all the time to us artists.
Well, the fact is that he was an art lover as much as he was an artist. So he wanted to consume art as much as possible, and he wanted to own art. He had a predilection for owning art. You know, some people have a habit for something, shoes or handbags or fancy makeup or whatever it's going to be. For him, it was painting.
Yeah. Do you think, though, that there's a requirement for artists to love the thing that they make, in the sense that, you know, he was collecting paintings of other people? I'm sure Van Gogh, to a certain extent, he was looking at peers around him making stuff. I mean, these people did not live in a vacuum.
No, Van Gogh didn't live in a vacuum, but he lived in a totally different context to Rembrandt. You know, Rembrandt, of course, was informed by the people around him, the political climate around him. So why famous painting, The Night Watch, and a variety of other paintings he made over the course of his career that show militiamen, basically, the enforcers of that very Protestantism that would otherwise have kept him out of work. Van Gogh was maybe less influenced by other art, but he was profoundly influenced by nature. He was profoundly influenced by relationship to self. Now, I've always found this fascinating as a comparison between Van Gogh and Rembrandt, both as Dutch artists, although separated by a few centuries, is that Rembrandt painted himself systematically throughout his life. So we can see him aging over time. Van Gogh's life was shorter. He was only 37 when he died. But he did make a lot of self-portraits as well. His self-awareness in his painting, I wondered often if it reveals more about him than Rembrandt's self-portrait paintings, or if that's just me in some way. Again, this idea of like projecting into the paintings, we look at this sense that I know Van Gogh better.
Yeah.
Because I simply know more about him.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I also, and maybe this feeds into what you're thinking too, I always think of Van Gogh, for I don't know what reason, as an early modern person, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Like I could imagine knowing him. I can't imagine knowing Rembrandt. Like it's too long ago. And Van Gogh felt like he was ahead of his time in his own brain somehow. You know what I'm saying? Where had he lived 15, 20 years later, maybe his work would have been more accepted. It's like listening to Joe Jackson's first record and you're just like, well, the world was not ready for this record in 1977 or whatever.
But I want to really look at this and for us to think about it deeply. We have an artist who calls himself an artist, understands the nature of being an artist in the context of his time and place.
Yeah. And makes a living being an artist, so he's accepted externally. Yeah.
Right. So he is the artist. He has arrived in art. And then we have someone like Van Gogh, who was driven by the compulsion to paint, to make work, to bed down in the surfaces and colours of what he produced. And even sometimes with Theo, his beloved brother, who did do so much to try and create the right environment within which Vincent could thrive as an artist, was never, ever successful. Now, in part, that was possibly hampered by what we think of maybe as his personality,
mental health,
things that would have made him quite unpalatable amongst the people he so wanted to maybe impress. But his declaration of being an artist, is he more or less of an artist because he was misunderstood?
Yeah, I was just about to say that. He is also not just misunderstood, but he feels historically like a little bit of a victim of his circumstances to some extent, and kind of a underdog. You know, is that a British term too? I don't even know, or is that just okay? So there is a question of whether or not we have more sympathy for the person we see as the kind of person you want to go give him a hug. If Van Gogh was a normal guy and there were writings of him and pictures of him, photographs of him, and he was just a total jerk who still painted the way he does, would people feel the same way about them? Or do they feel this way about him because it seems like he's lonely, and people who like art tend to be lonely people, so they're looking at his paintings and thinking, oh, he's just like me, and there's this transference that happens. And so therefore he gains some level of sympathy, and Heather and I were having this conversation this morning about people who think they know famous people, you know, how sad people were, say, when Lady Diana died or whatever. And it's like, you never knew her. You know what her PR people put out about her. You know what I mean? No one really knew her. Like, why are you sad about somebody you never actually knew, you know? Or how do you feel that you're connected to all these famous people, even though you really have nothing in common with them, as far as we can tell? And so I wonder if part of it isn't that Van Gogh feels a little bit like a sad puppy where Rembrandt doesn't. And so therefore we give him a little more leash to pull on, you know?
Well, I don't mean there's disinformation here, but there's also, though, again, the idea that with Rembrandt, actually, are we not missing something here? You know, here's someone, yes, he was accepted as an artist. He was paid for his work. He made his living doing what he did. And he certainly didn't want for very much when the living was high. Now, he did swing like a bit of a pendulum in his financial life because of his proclivities. But he did experience enormous suffering in his life.
Sure.
It's just that perhaps they're framed differently for him.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll
What's not, hang on, wait a second though. Let's think about the kind of definition of the type that we might assume as an underdog. Here is Rembrandt. He is not highborn, yet he is preternaturally talented at painting, and he trains with people, and he eschews and shuns the typical, the stereotype. He doesn't go to Italy. He says, no, I can stay here in Holland and I can do just as well. He rides the crest, even though, as I said, the bottom fell out of his market because the Catholic Church were, definitely not welcome. And nonetheless, he carved his niche. Yet he had a wife who died very young, who he really adored. He had lots of down points in his, again, financial life, but often with other women. He had a common law wife for a while who eventually sued him and took him to court because he'd apparently promised to marry her, but he fell in love with the other housekeeper. I don't know, something like that. There's all kinds of things that were going on in his life that would have been really difficult for him. Yep. But in so many ways, and so many people I speak to perceive Rembrandt to be this jolly, tubby, just sort of rambunctious chap.
Well, I think multiple things go into that. One, he lived a lot longer than, say, Vincent did, right? A. B, you keep talking. What? Say again? 63 versus 37 is a significantly much longer time. He lived to be an older man, where
he lived to be an older man through a life that was still full of sadness.
but I mean, I know you like this narrative of him not being able to make a living because of the Catholic Church, but I keep harping back to the fact that this was at a time when everything was changing and the church wasn't the only way to make money in art.
No, indeed.
Rich people were suddenly around and had money to spend, and they weren't just the aristocracy. They were upper middle class merchants and whatnot, which is what a lot of that work ends up being. So I think in some ways he ended up hitting it. It's sort of like, the computer revolution is coming in and everyone's like, you need to keep selling typewriters. And one guy's just like, nah, I'm going to go make a computer company. And he becomes Bill Gates. Like, in some ways, Rembrandt caught the wave at just the right time.
Yeah.
And he stayed in Holland so he could have a career there. I also, even now, know a lot of artists, including a lot of photographers, names redacted, who, had years where they made a lot of money and then had nothing to show for it 10 years later because they were really bad with their money. So, to some extent, that's on him. You know what I mean? What I'm saying is that I think that some of it comes into Rembrandt just making bad choices. He had a lot of the ups and then he squandered them, versus Vincent not really having many of the ups in the beginning.
I know, but Vincent, God love him, he really did make bad choices as well.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
He made dreadful choices.
Yeah. I think a lot of people do. Now, my question to you is, where do you come down on personal responsibility for bad choices in general? Some people will hand wave away and say, oh, it's circumstances this, it's the time that, it's mental illness this, it's whatever that. And all of those things are elements of it. But to some extent, and when it comes down to it, like the adage that I keep coming up with lately is, life isn't about making good choices, it's about not making bad choices. If you just don't make bad choices, you're probably going to be okay. It's about making, so listen, I have, if you had to ask me whose paintings I prefer, I would probably say Rembrandt personally. Like, I like Van Gogh. I've been to I've seen hundreds of his paintings. I've been to the museum in Amsterdam. Like, I've done the whole thing. I've seen the potato eaters to the end. You know what I mean? They're fine. They all kind of look exactly the same to me, which is also true of Rembrandt, right? Isn't it interesting that nowadays so many artists, if they do the same thing over the course of their career, over the course of 2 years, people are like, yeah, I'm bored of this. Can you do something new? Where a lot of these artists were basically doing the same thing for 30 years.
Yeah, don't forget though, they're also painters in a way that, we don't necessarily have. the limitations of technical painting anymore that they might have done. Even Van Gogh, you know, I mean, painting for him was usually quite swift, but that's because of the way he applied the paint. For Rembrandt, painting, even relative to him, I mean, Rembrandt was quite a quick painter, actually, for somebody who
but but at least, you know, Vincent had paint tubes and he had, you know, like the technology of the day, right?
Right, but also painting is a very slow way to capture a moment.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, we've talked about that before.
Yeah, even when photography was around.
This actually is really interesting because I don't really want to compare, and I don't think there is a comparison between Rembrandt and Van Gogh, really. But I think
no,
just
other than the fact that they are portrait painters 200 years apart, there's very little that they haven't.
And they're Dutch, yeah. But I just wanted to pick them as examples where there was like the great I am, the declaration of artist, with such different outcomes for their lives. And I wondered if there was a qualification for being an artist that isn't about that silly bit of paper. From
I think a lot of it, I think a lot of it comes down to timing and circumstances. Things that are outside of the control of the person.
Do you think somebody can be an artist when they don't declare themselves an artist?
Sure.
How so?
I think if they make art but don't call themselves an artist.
What if they don't call what they make art?
You know, I mean, there's, I don't want to open a can of worms, but somebody like Vivian Mayer, right? Or did they want their art to be seen? Do they want art? Does art need to be seen by other people to be art? Or if it's just in a drawer, then you only ever look at it, is it still art?
No, but don't move away from the original part of that question.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, there are a lot of people who don't think that their work is good enough to call themselves an artist. And they kind of think, oh man, I don't get to call myself an artist. Other people can call me an artist. Also, I'd like to say that artists, let me ask you a question. If you were a photographer or a painter or a sculptor or whatever it is, would you say I'm an artist, or would you say I'm a sculptor, painter, photographer, or whatever?
I don't understand what the distinction would be.
That art is artist is an umbrella term. It's not a particular skill or you know, pursuit. Being an artist isn't a pursuit.
I think I would say artist only because in my life,
multidisciplinary
of making work, is I've made lots of different work.
Sure.
From painting, drawing, to photography, moving image, and then even things that maybe don't fall within visual art.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your class the other day asked me if I think I was a good photographer. Was one of the questions. And first of all, I just think it's funny because when I was a kid, if some 40-something-year-old person who I was talking to as a student, I would never ask them if they thought they were good at what they do. I think it's a perfectly valid question. It's just interesting how the work times have changed.
No, I mean, actually, I do want to just mention that the student who chose to ask you that question, we talked a lot about that question before they met you.
Yeah.
And we were aware that that question is a quite a contentious question.
Well, I think it could be taken as such by somebody who isn't as
self-deprecating
as I am.
I probably wouldn't have got them to ask that question of an artist I didn't know.
Right. Yeah. You know what you know that I think about that myself. So it's an interesting question.
I do think it's an interesting question for all artists to ask themselves.
Sure. Right. And probably many of them do, but don't want to visibly say so. I guess my point of bringing it up is only to say, you know, there are times when, no, I don't think I'm a good photographer and I wouldn't call myself an artist. Actually, in the last 12 hours, that's happened to me. So I've had a crisis of faith. I couldn't sleep last night. So this happens from time to time. I think that the majority of people who look at my work would say, yes, he's a competent photographer. There are plenty of times when I think nothing. So I personally would not call myself an artist. I'm a hack artist. I'm a decent photographer, if that makes sense. I think every once in a while I make something that somebody could call art, but I don't always feel like that myself. But at the same time, I also think there's a lot of other people who call themselves artists who are, you know, below the line that I draw for myself. And I'm like, man, if I don't call myself an artist, how the heck can you? So, but that's all just my personal opinion, right? So I'm just one of a horde of people. I think the whole idea of self-definition is difficult, which is why I would say I'm a photographer and not I'm an artist. Even though I make music and I write screenplays and I write short films and I do all these things, I would say I'm a screenwriter and I'm a photographer, I'm a whatever. I would never say I'm an artist. I don't know. There's something about it that irks me. Why are you laughing?
Just yet again, how differently we can come at the same things.
Do you consider yourself an artist?
I struggle with it because my output is so limited these days. Because I'm always doing it. I'm always teaching.
Does the amount of output a valid distinction?
I think in terms of self-definition, for me personally, yes, there is a sense that I feel quite fraudulent. I feel fraudulent saying to somebody I'm an artist and they say, oh, what do you make? And I'm like, well, nothing. I don't make anything. Not in a cool
you make YouTube shows.
I do all this other stuff that's about art.
Yeah.
But am I still an artist? I know that once I was an artist. Isn't that a sad statement? Once I think an artist.
Yeah.
And I really was an artist. I think that I was self-defining. I was also defined as such from outside, from other people. Yep. And it gave me enormous pleasure, dare I say it, and also confidence. And the thrill of it, the thrill of being called an artist, but it was short-lived because then time gets eaten into by other concerns. And in my case, that's been about going around the place talking to people about art, which I really love. And through teaching, I get to do that every single day. But teaching, as anyone who has been a teacher or has met a dedicated teacher will know, is extremely time consuming.
Do you think your discussion of art is more or less risky than a blank page making art, as it were?
I'm aware of a great risk in talking about art.
For fear of saying something wrong?
For fear that somebody somewhere
disagrees with you.
Well, people are going to disagree with me, but
somebody over in Brooklyn disagrees with you.
Yeah, you do. Having a role where one expects you to, others expect me to know things, and I often don't know things.
Sure.
That's quite scary because I'm also aware that in the role of facilitator, for example, in groups, sometimes people look to me to give them an answer and they want something finite, contained and resolved, parceled neatly for them. Mm-hmm. In a question they might ask, or indeed the questions I might be asking of them.
Yeah, and they don't realize that you're not looking for answers. You're looking for the process of answering.
I'm not even looking for, I have a problem with that as well, Bill, but there is a process, of course, sure. But it's also simply about being in the space right. in which one is free to look at these things. Now,
yeah, the journey is the destination. Go ahead.
Can you stop?
Sorry, go ahead.
Doing that?
I'm just trying to understand what you're saying.
No, you're trying to speed me up, but it doesn't work. It slows me down.
Go ahead.
No, I'm done now.
No, but I guess my question is, if you tomorrow decided to stop talking about art and decided solely to start making art and letting the art speak for you, Do you think how would you react to that?
Well, the art speaking for me makes less sense to me, only because I don't believe myself to be separate from it.
Right.
I don't think ever made work that's separate from me.
Okay. You think other artists do?
Sometimes when I talk to you, I think you make work that's separate from you. But I wonder if also that's a commercial thing.
Maybe, or maybe it's a self-protection scheme.
Explain.
It's very difficult for people to criticize things that you make when you own them and hold on to them too tightly. Because then when they criticize your work, they're criticizing you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a game you can play with yourself to dissociate from the work a little bit, so that it is in other. So therefore, when they attack the other, they're not attacking you.
That sounds terribly poignant, but does that lack integrity?
Well, integrity, you mean just therefore I'm not standing up for my own work kind of thing?
It's not as simple as calling a spade, but it's in the same ballpark. It's like, here I am.
Yeah.
This is my work. You can look at it, you can feel it as your own, you can do what you want with it. But for me, it's part of me. It is me.
Yeah. Sometimes the work that I make, very little of the work that I make actually gets where I want it to get. And therefore, I have a hard time putting my name on it in that way. It's like, this is a poor representation of what I was trying to do due to my lack of insight, artistic expression, or skill. Therefore, I am not an artist. And you can take or leave what this thing actually is, even if it is objectively competent, you know.
I'm always
but I feel this way about everything in that I do and say in my life, you know.
I'm not sure that would have picked up what both of us are saying at the same time there.
Go ahead.
I was saying to you, Bill, that I'm not sure why you ever sell yourself short or so short in your description of what you do.
Interestingly, go ahead.
It puzzles me because, I mean, I don't think I'm the most supremely confident person in the world. Yet I do seem to have a much different, is it self-confidence? To let this be? You know, I don't want to really control.
Let what be? I don't quite understand.
So I can say I'm an artist.
Yeah.
And yes, it gives me pause now because, as I said, I feel quite fraudulent because I don't make very much anymore.
Sure.
But I didn't feel guilty or shame or ashamed in calling myself an artist, and nor do I feel ashamed or self-conscious sitting here now talking to you or anybody else who's listening, saying I acknowledge that I have been an artist and that actually deep in my soul I'm an artist, and that thing is not separate to me. I'm not claiming it as an external and bring it towards me. It's simply part of me. I don't feel weird about that. I don't feel bad about that.
Sure.
I don't think that's too woo-woo, as you would say. I get a bit woo-woo.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that when people say things like that, and this is not directed towards you particular, but just in general, statements like that make me kind of roll my eyes because I say, well, what does that even mean? That is okay.
What does it mean?
I'm a spaceman. You know what I mean? Like
it's
meaningless.
The thing that you move away from every time you deny yourself the title artist.
What am I moving away from?
You move away from that thing that is not about like a physical linear calculated objective thing.
But see, that's the thing. That is really all that there is. And anything beyond that is me putting self-importance on top of what is just reality. The things that I think and make and do are not special. Everyone thinks and makes and does things.
Oh, no, I don't mean that then somebody who says I'm an artist. I'm not saying I'm an artist and what I do is special. But I can acknowledge it as art. And I can.
Then what is the distinction? That's the thing I don't understand.
Oh, maybe that's a really good question.
I mean, why isn't some random person skipping rocks on a lake says I'm an artist? Okay. Well, it goes, it's like The Incredibles. If everybody's an artist, that means that's another way of saying no one is. I don't know. I mean, yes, absolutely. My view of it is based upon a certain, this is really ironic, me saying this, sort of Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, puritanical, work ethic, don't be too big for your britches, very New England kind of way of looking at things. Certainly all of that is true.
Well, what am I as an equivalent then?
Well, that's why I'm saying it's just kind of silly, because I am the, the diminutive version of all of those things in this case. I'm
like a princess by comparison.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It's just, it is interesting to say, like, I am raised in a way that says you don't sing your own songs. You don't, you don't build your own bridges. Like you just humble,
Is it not? How interesting. Was Van Gogh humble? Historical evidence would suggest, actually, from what we can glean about him from his letters and so on, he was very humble.
Yeah, but I think there were also moments where he thought that he was just being screwed by reality, I don't think he was sitting saying, I'm making these paintings and they're terrible, terrible, terrible. There were times when he was saying, I'm making these great paintings and no one cares.
Are you being categoric about this, though, by saying that, for example, humility is an artist or humility isn't an artist?
No, I'm saying, I guess my big thing is that I don't know what the self-definition gets me that I don't have already. It doesn't change the way I think about my work. Maybe on some PR level, it would change the way other people think of my work. I'm an artist. I'm not just a portrait photographer. Therefore, I get to charge twice as much for my work. Like some kind of crazy thing like that. There's arguments to be made for that. I just don't like, I want my work to be taken as I make it, not as I say that it is. I want people to look at my work and make decisions on it, not based upon what I tell them that it's good or bad or what. I don't know.
I think for a lot of people, saying they're an artist is very brave.
No, I don't see it as brave.
I do.
No, I see it's not, it's one of those things that people think is hard, but really isn't hard. You just got to do it, but you do it and then it doesn't actually change anything. That's the thing about calling yourself an artist. It doesn't change anything. You know what changes things? Actually making art. That's it. It's like you can be a writer. What have you written lately? You haven't written in 3 years? Well, then you're not a writer. You're somebody who wants to write. And to me, the doing is everything, and everything else is just
doing, not naming.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the start, you said that there was only the definition of self-defining as an artist.
Well, I just don't like the term artist in general. But if you're going to have somebody make a decision on it, I guess it's the person has to decide. But I still don't know what it does for you.
Oh, Bill.
I love when you're disappointed with me at the end of these things.
No, not at all. I think this is such a fascinating area of study and exploration. Who the hell is an artist? What gives the artist a right to say they're an artist?
What difference does it make is my question. Throw all of that away and the stuff they made is still there. Throw all the stuff they made away and it's meaningless.
Sorry to throw this back at you. You spend most weeks we talk putting everything into labeled boxes.
I do.
So what's wrong with lifting the lid on the box that says artist?
Because the label doesn't mean anything.
Does his argument stand up in court?
Oh, find out next week.
I don't think this is where I thought this would go.
I'm sorry to disappoint you.
No, it's not disappointing. It's the way of it.
That was fun.
Thanks, Bill.
Always fun, Sandi. My favorite hour of the week.